Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something almost no one alive today will ever experience, unless your surname is Bezos, Musk, or you recently found a winning lottery ticket stuck to your Roomba. That's right. We're talking about being filthy rich in medieval times. Not just can I afford a pumpkin spice latte, but my bathtub is solid gold, my bedsheets are imported, and the peasants bow so low they pull a hamstring rich. So, before you sink into your mattress, which, let's be honest, probably isn't stuffed with swan feathers, do me a favor. Like, subscribe, and comment below, but only if you actually enjoy this sort of thing. Tell me what city you're listening from, or just confess your weirdest rich person fantasy. Do you dream of owning a moat, a drawbridge, a team of professional cheese tasters? I'm not judging. Now, dim the lights. Turn on your fan for that white noise luxury the medieval 1% would have killed for. Tuck yourself in, and, if you're really committed, try sleeping at a 45-degree angle surrounded by taxidermied falcons. Let's take a moment and wonder. Have you ever imagined what it's like to be so wealthy that you never have to touch your own socks? Did medieval lords actually bathe in milk? Or was that just a rumor spread by jealous dairy farmers? How did you flex your status when your social media options were limited to calling a bard or commissioning a tapestry? What happens when your gold-plated toilet freezes solid? How many servants does it really take to dress one man in 40 buttons and a hat that looks like a fruit bowl? Did they ever wake up at 3 a.m., sweating about investments, or just about the peasants outside with torches? And now, congratulations! You've just woken up as the richest person in your county, possibly your kingdom. It's 1380. 7. You have silk sheets, suspiciously clean fingernails, and the sneaking suspicion that your chef is secretly French. Good luck. You awake gently to the sound of lute music, because alarm clocks haven't been invented, and your lute player is on retainer. The bed? Suspiciously soft, layered with so many animal furs and imported silks that you spend the first 5 minutes untangling yourself like a medieval lasagna. Outside, peasants are already at work. Inside, your biggest decision is, which velvet slippers today? It's still early. The sun is barely nudging its way over the frosted horizon. But your chamber is already warm, thanks to the roaring fire stoked by a servant who snuck in before dawn, tiptoeing past tapestries depicting your great-grandfather winning a pig wrestling contest. The air smells faintly of rosewater and beeswax, which is what happens when you can afford to have someone sprinkle your fireplace with perfume and light candles that cost more than most people's annual rent. Your chamber is so large you could get lost in it. Actually, you did get lost in it once, last winter, after a little too much mulled wine and a very confusing conversation with the court jester. The floor is covered in rugs so thick you could probably drop a ham on them and never hear it land. Above you, beams creak gently, reminding you that yes, you own enough wood to build an entire village, but you chose instead to decorate your ceiling with it. A servant stands quietly in the corner, trying very hard to look invisible, ready to hand you your dressing gown and politely ignore the fact that you're drooling slightly on a pillow, stuffed with goose down and embroidered with your family crest. You don't even have to move to start your day. Someone is there to open the curtains, chase away the chamber cats, and quietly remove last night's empty wine goblet. It's a delicate operation, because the last time someone startled you awake, you knocked over a chamber pot and accidentally promoted a squire to master of carpets. That was a weird month. You stretch luxuriously, feeling the mountain of blankets shift and sigh around you. Your feet never touch the cold floor. In fact, you haven't felt a cold floor since 1379, when you briefly considered going rustic after a pilgrimage. That lasted about 2 hours, until you stepped on a chicken feather and nearly sprained your nobility. These days, it's all about slippers lined with something soft, maybe ermine, maybe something even more exotic, like imported Italian rabbit fur. The choices are dizzying as you contemplate your footwear, Another servant appears with a wash basin of warm, scented water. You allow yourself to be gently dabbed and patted dry, like a particularly high-maintenance house cat. The towel is thick enough to be used as winter insulation, and yes, it has your initials, because you're rich, and everything in your life is monogrammed, even the chamber pot, especially the chamber pot. The day's clothes have already been selected and laid out with the care usually reserved for coronation regalia or possibly a high-stakes masquerade. Your undergarments are softer than most people's wildest dreams. There's a robe for lounging, a tunic for serious castle business, and, of course, a selection of hats in case you need to assert dominance over breakfast. You make a mental note to try the new peacock-feathered one, just to see if it unsettles the cook. Outside, the sounds of the estate begin to filter in, a rooster announcing its presence to the world, the blacksmith hammering something large and unnecessarily shiny, a distant shout as someone tries to catch a runaway sheep. You consider waving graciously from the window, but that sounds a bit exhausting, so you simply let the staff handle it. You sip from a cup of spiced wine brought in on a silver tray and contemplate the rest of your morning. A leisurely breakfast, perhaps a stroll through the gardens, assuming the weather is agreeable, and if not, someone will fetch a portable velvet canopy. For now, you linger in bed, letting the soft sunlight and lute music lull you into the most important decision you'll make all day. Will you have your slippers brought to you, or will you ring for the footman of footmen to carry you across the room entirely? Because, really, what's the point of being filthy rich if you ever have to use your own feet? Being rich means never having to visit the communal dung heap. Instead, you have a wooden garderobe jutting out over the moat, a private throne room where even your business gets a scenic view. Sometimes the moat freezes, but that's a problem for the help. You wonder idly if scented rushes will ever catch on. Let's set the scene. While the peasants are busy digging latrine pits and squatting in the shrubbery, you are gliding across your solar in a robe so heavy it could double as a winter coat for a small horse. Your bathroom isn't just a room, it's an architectural flex. The garderobe is cleverly perched at the edge of the castle wall, with a seat carved from old oak and a little window carved into the stone, just big enough to make awkward eye contact with passing swans. This is the medieval rich person's equivalent of heated seats and Bluetooth speakers, except the only thing streaming is what's leaving the room, not what's coming in. It's not just the location, it's the experience. Your attendants have already scattered dried herbs, petals, and maybe even a dash of rosemary in a noble but ultimately futile attempt to disguise what's about to happen. For extra luxury, someone has hung fresh linen on the wall, so you can wipe away any residual embarrassment with something softer than your neighbor's best tunic. There's a basket of scented rushes at your feet. Will it catch on? Doubtful. But at least you can claim you started the trend. If it does, you sit high above the moat, looking out over your domain. Ducks paddle serenely below, blissfully unaware of the medieval indoor plumbing revolution happening right above their heads. Sometimes, on a cold winter's morning, you catch a thin ribbon of steam rising from the water and wonder just how much the kitchen staff would charge to warm the garderobe seat for you next time. Maybe you'll make it a new job title, Master of the Heated Plank. For all its supposed privacy, the bathroom is never entirely your own. The castle's stone walls echo, amplifying every sound with the subtlety of a cathedral bell. The help pretends not to notice. The dog, however, is less polite, nosing open the door to see if any treats have fallen. You wave it away with practiced dignity because you're rich, and dignity is supposed to be your default setting, even here, if you really want to show off. There are rumors that some nobles are installing double garderobes, side by side, for couples who like to overshare. No one is quite sure if this is the height of romance or the end of it, but you keep the idea filed away for when you're next bored at a banquet. Of course, being rich doesn't mean you're immune to the challenges of medieval sanitation. Sometimes, a particularly bold draft finds its way up through the chute, reminding you that nature is undefeated. Sometimes, the moat freezes, and it's someone else's job to go break the ice, literally and metaphorically. Occasionally, something precious, like a ring or last month's dinner, falls down the shaft, at which point a servant is summoned and you deliver the dreaded phrase, "Fetch." You try not to think about what it's like down there, and frankly, you pay good money never to find out. And yet, compared to everyone else in the kingdom, you're living in plumbing paradise. There's no risk of running into your neighbor mid-squat, no accidental encounters with angry geese, no need to shout "Garde-lo" before emptying anything out the window. Your waste simply disappears, along with the memory of every awkward breakfast you've ever had. After all, in the world of medieval luxury, it's not what you own, it's what you don't have to share. And nothing says I've made it quite like flushing your problems straight into the moat and never thinking about them again. You linger a moment longer, enjoying the brisk breeze, the privacy, and the absolute certainty that whatever happens in the peasant's latrine, it's not your problem. You adjust your robe, reach for a perfumed hand towel, and step back into your world of furs, feasts, and unshared seats, a true medieval status symbol if there ever was one. Dressing yourself? Unthinkable. That's why you have a team of attendants to lace, button, and strategically stuff you into layers of linen, velvet, and I paid a tailor 5 goats for this embroidery. The richest don't just wear clothes. They wear entire ecosystems. Your first conscious thought, upon waking up, is not about your legacy, your lands, or even breakfast. It's the comforting knowledge that, for the next 40 minutes, you won't have to lift a single finger unless it's to point at the wrong color hose. A gentle knock at the door signals the arrival of your wardrobe squad, each one trained to look respectfully away while you sit motionless, arms spread like a sleepy scarecrow waiting to be decorated for festival season. It starts simple enough. The linen undergarments, bleached so blindingly white you could use them to signal passing ships, are slipped over your arms and legs by 2 attendants working in perfect silent harmony. Their hands move quickly, cinching ties, smoothing seams, and expertly ignoring your morning complaints about the draft. At this stage, you still resemble a person. That will not last. Next, the padding. Quilted doublets, woolen hose, sometimes even extra cotton inserts in places you'd prefer not to mention, all engineered to give you the shapely silhouette of a well-stuffed armchair. No one explains why fashion dictates you look like you've just eaten 6 loaves of bread, but you suspect it's about status, or maybe insulation, or possibly just a centuries-old prank on the upper class. Now for the main event, your outer garments. Velvet, brocade, satin, fur, if it's soft, shiny, or made some poor animal very sad, it's in your wardrobe. The tunic alone is heavy enough to double as body armor. The embroidery is so detailed, you could get lost in it. In fact, once you caught a glimpse of a unicorn stitched into your left sleeve and spent the rest of the day distracted by existential questions about medieval wildlife. Attendants lace up the back, button the sleeves, tie the sides, and occasionally resort to gentle shoving to get everything to line up. A particularly ambitious attendant might present a jeweled belt, which you accept with the weary sigh of someone who remembers when belts were just for holding up pants. And then, the codpiece. It is not just an accessory, it is a declaration of confidence, virility, and the fact that sumptuary laws have clearly failed. The codpiece is buckled, tied, and, if you're feeling especially dramatic, perhaps even bedazzled, you nod at your reflection, which now bears a striking resemblance to a walking, talking coat of arms. Accessories come next. Shoes with pointed toes so long you need a servant just to navigate corners. Stockings with delicate embroidery, and gloves lined with rabbit fur. Rings are stacked on every available finger, sometimes 2 to a knuckle. Your neck is festooned with chains, your ears with heavy golden baubles. your hat adorned with feathers, because nothing says old money like wearing a small bird on your head before breakfast. You're almost ready, but not quite. The cloak is the pièce de résistance. It is less of a garment and more of a portable status update, requiring 2 people to drape it over your shoulders and 3 more to fluff it out behind you as you sweep from room to room. The weight is reassuring. It means you are wealthy enough to afford back problems. Finally, your transformation is complete. You are a tapestry with legs, a monument to excess, and a testament to the power of disposable income. You can no longer touch your toes, and turning your head requires a 5-point turn, but you look magnificent. The servants bow, the door is opened, and you waddle triumphantly toward the day's first challenge, finding a chair that can handle both your dignity and your wardrobe. And if anyone ever asks why you need 4 people to help you put on pants, you can simply smile serenely and remind them, true luxury is never having to pull up your own trousers. A medieval breakfast for the wealthy is basically an Olympic event. Eggs, roasted game birds, bread soft enough to bend the laws of physics, and cheese so fancy it has its own crest. Your only real task is deciding whether to start with wine or the medicinal spiced ale. Decisions, decisions. Let's set the table. Not that you do it yourself, heavens, no. The morning meal in a great hall is a spectacle. Sunlight pouring through stained glass windows, flickering off golden goblets and making yesterday's crumbs look positively blessed. Your seat is the best in the house, naturally, strategically placed far from the drafty door and close enough to the hearth that you can toast your toes while pretending to listen to your cousin's complaints about sheep prices. Servants swarm in, arms loaded with trays, plates, and mysterious covered dishes. The table groans under the weight. Whole smoked eels, pies stuffed with things you don't remember ordering, and a mountain of fruit that will likely be used later as missile ammunition during the afternoon's friendly family dispute. Someone brings in a roast peacock, yes, feathers and all, because in the medieval upper class, nothing says good morning like a dead bird dressed fancier than you. You begin with the basics. Eggs. Poach so gently they tremble at the touch of your spoon. There's bacon, of course. But not just any bacon. This bacon has a pedigree, traced back through generations of noble pigs. It's served with a side of something called pottage, which, in this context, is less an act of survival and more a chance for the cook to show off by throwing in saffron, almonds, and whatever spices the local apothecary hasn't hoarded yet. The bread deserves its own paragraph. It's pillow soft, crusty on the outside, but somehow yielding enough to be folded, dipped, or even sculpted into a tiny castle if you're feeling whimsical. Sometimes, the kitchen staff gets creative, adding honey or dried fruit, transforming each loaf into an edible status symbol. Just don't mention that most of the flour was imported from 3 counties away. No one likes a show-off. You taste the cheese, which arrives on a silver platter, each wedge marked with a colored ribbon and a tiny wax seal. Some are so sharp they could double as weapons in a pinch. One of them is rumored to have been aged in the crypt, which is probably just a marketing ploy. But you admire the dedication to dairy drama. Now comes the parade of game birds, partridge, pheasant, maybe even a suspiciously smug-looking swan, all roasted, all glistening, all arranged artfully on platters surrounded by carved turnips and the kind of garnish no one actually eats. There's a quiet contest among your guests to see who can ask for the rarest bird without actually having to eat it. Someone inevitably mentions the fabled ortolan, and everyone pretends to know what that island. And what are you drinking? Well, it's breakfast, so you keep it simple. Just a goblet of watered-down wine, a mug of small ale that's mostly herbs and hope, and maybe a dash of that spiced cider the apothecary swears will protect you from the plague. Water is for washing hands, occasionally, and sometimes for putting out small fires. Never for drinking. Not when the moat is right outside and full of floating mysteries. Conversation swirls around you. gossip about the neighboring lord's new moat, heated debate over whether garlic is the devil's root, and the latest scandal involving someone's daughter running off with a lute player. You listen, nodding at the appropriate moments, mostly focused on navigating the complex plate choreography required when you have 3 knives, 2 forks, and a spoon so large it could be used for bailing out the wine cellar. By the time the last crumb has been swept away, you're comfortably full, mildly tipsy, and mentally prepared for a day of very important loafing. You lean back, sigh contentedly, and watch as the servants begin clearing the table, already whispering about what's for lunch, because when you're breakfasting like a baron, the only thing more excessive than the meal is the certainty that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Home is not a place, it's a fortress. Your castle has so many rooms you occasionally lose a relative. Every wall is thick enough to muffle the sound of peasants complaining, and your moat doubles as a very exclusive alligator sanctuary. The drafty halls? That's just old money air conditioning. Let's take a gentle stroll through your humble abode, if you can call a sprawling stone labyrinth humble. The outer walls are 10 feet thick and designed less for beauty and more for withstanding siege equipment, angry neighbors, or, worst of all, surprise visits from the in-laws. Every window is tiny, either for shooting arrows at attackers or just to maximize your vitamin D deficiency. The moat wraps around the castle, wide enough to drown a small army, or at the very least, discourage anyone from dropping by uninvited. Is it filled with water? Usually. Is there anything in it? That depends on your definition of anything. Some prefer eels, some prefer swans, but you, being a trendsetter, have started the alligator thing. No one's sure where you found them, and the peasants whisper that they eat tax collectors, which only adds to your mystique. Inside, the entry hall is a cavernous, echoing space lined with fading tapestries and the kind of antique benches that collapse if anyone under the age of 50 sits down. The floors are a patchwork of ancient flagstones, polished by centuries of noble feet and the occasional terrified servant skidding around corners. The air is always slightly chilly, but that's what furs and 4-layered cloaks are for. If you wanted central heating, you should have been born in the future. Navigating the castle is an adventure in itself. There are staircases that spiral, staircases that dead end, and at least one secret passage that leads directly to the wine cellar. You discovered it by accident one night and promptly forgot about it. But the local mice have built a thriving community in your absence. At least twice a year, someone gets lost, often a cousin visiting from out of town, sometimes a dog. Once the bishop. He eventually turned up in the turret, slightly more devout, and with a new appreciation for indoor plumbing. Your private chambers are a study in medieval opulence. Stone walls, high ceilings, and a fireplace big enough to roast a wild boar. The bed is enormous, less for comfort and more for status, as if you might spontaneously host an entire tournament's worth of guests under the covers. There are so many tapestries that you've forgotten the color of the walls. Somewhere in the room is a chest filled with emergency jewelry, a backup sword, and 3 sets of keys to doors you never use. Then there are the guest rooms, dozens of them, each more drafty and haunted than the last. No one ever stays in the one above the kitchen because of the mysterious noises, which may or may not be rats with aspirations of nobility. The best rooms have views of the moat, though view mostly means you can check to see if the alligators are still on duty. The Great Hall is where the magic happens, or at least where the feasts, fights, and fainting spells do. Long wooden tables, a roaring fire, and enough banners to remind everyone that yes, you're rich and yes, you defeated the neighboring baron in that famous arm wrestling contest. The acoustics are incredible for both singing and eavesdropping, which is how you keep up with all the latest castle gossip. But for all its splendor, your castle isn't just for show. It's a symbol of power, a playground for the rich, and, on cold winter nights, a surprisingly effective wind tunnel. You walk the halls in slippers, cloak trailing behind, occasionally opening a door just to see where it leads. Some nights, you hear the distant howl of the wind, or maybe just your cousin yelling from the east wing, "Lost again." And as you settle into your favorite chair by the fire, surrounded by stone, silk, and the faint echo of distant complaining, you can't help but feel, drafts and all, that there's no place like home, especially when your home is impossible to find your way out of. Unlike the unwashed masses, you can actually afford soap, maybe even two kinds. Bathing is a production. Wooden tubs, heated water, rose petals, servants fanning the steam. You leave cleaner than most people get in their entire lifetimes, but only if you survive the logistics of transporting enough hot water up the stairs. Let's break it down. For most people, bathing is a twice-a-year panic brought on by marriage or disease. For you, it's an event. Bath night is circled on the calendar, whispered about in the halls, and requires more planning than a royal banquet. First, a small army of servants assembles the wooden tub, big enough for you, but just small enough to remind you that even as a lord, you're still at the mercy of medieval carpentry. They polish it until it gleams, or at least, until it looks less like the inside of a barrel. Next comes the water. Boiling enough for a decent soak is a team effort. Giant cauldrons are dragged from the kitchens, and strong-backed footmen form a wobbly relay line up flights of spiral stairs, sloshing buckets and spilling half of it at every turn. By the time the tub is full, your bathroom floor looks like the site of a very minor flood, and your servants are rethinking their life choices. But you're not done. No self-respecting noble bathes in plain water. Oh no. Scented herbs, lavender, thyme, maybe even rosemary if the gardener's feeling generous, are sprinkled on the surface. Rose petals float dreamily. Sometimes milk is added, mostly for show, because nothing says I have disposable income, like bathing, in something you could be drinking. If you're feeling especially luxurious, you order a wedge of imported soap, carved into the shape of a swan, and displayed proudly for exactly one guest before it dissolves into a slippery memory. Your attendants fan the rising steam, filling the room with the faint aroma of expensive cleanliness. A musician might be stationed nearby, plucking a gentle melody on a harp, because nothing spoils the mood like the distant sound of someone arguing with a goat. A privacy screen is unfolded, decorated, of course, with scenes of famous bathers and the kind of mythological creatures who clearly never had to explain to anyone how much this all costs. Now comes the tricky part. Getting into the tub without losing your dignity. The sides are high, the bottom is slippery, and your sense of grace is inversely proportional to the number of people pretending not to watch you. Eventually, you settle in, sigh, and let the warmth soak away your worries, and hopefully most of the crumbs from last night's pie binge. You recline, basking in the glow of luxury, while a servant carefully scrubs your back with a linen cloth, and another refills your goblet. There's soap, real soap, that smells of almonds, or honey, or the kind of floral blend that makes even your enemies admit you're fragrant. You're gently rinsed with fresh water, just warm enough to remind you that you're not, in fact, a peasant boiling his feet in a puddle. Of course, all this pampering comes with minor hazards. The water cools quickly, and calling for more hot water risks flooding the entire upper floor. There's always the danger that your bath will attract every cat in the castle, eager to chase the petals or just judge you silently from the corner. And heaven help you if the soap slips out of your hand. Retrieving it means reenacting a tragicomedy in front of your audience. When it's over, you emerge, radiant and smelling like a noble bouquet, wrapped in towels thick enough to stop an arrow. Your skin feels soft. Your hair is combed, and you're confident you could survive at least 3 hours before needing another soak. The tub is wheeled away, the servants mop up, and your bathwater is unceremoniously dumped into the moat, where it instantly raises the property value for a few lucky ducks. For the rest of the castle, your clean scent lingers like a rumor. For you, it's just another day as someone so rich. Even your hygiene is a production worth watching. Your teeth, brushed with ground-up pearls or burnt rosemary. Depending on what's trending at court, a private barber visits regularly, trimming beards into fashionable shapes and sometimes doubling as your amateur dentist. The truly wealthy spritz themselves with imported perfumes that mask all but the deepest medieval funk. Let's talk details. For most people, grooming means picking hay out of their hair and hoping for the best. But you, a person of extravagant means, have turned self-maintenance into a competitive sport. The first order of business: your mouth. Oral hygiene in medieval times is less science, more wild optimism. You don't just have a toothbrush, oh no. You have a collection of dental curiosities. Sticks, rags, little bundles of mint, and occasionally a concoction your apothecary swears is very nearly safe. The latest trend: tooth powder made from crushed oyster shells, dried sage, and, if you're feeling especially flashy, ground pearls. Because nothing says I'm loaded quite like scrubbing your molars with gemstones. Does it work? Maybe. Does it make you look important while doing it? Absolutely. For breath, you chew on cloves, parsley, or, on bad mornings, a whole sprig of rosemary. This is not just oral care, it's aromatherapy for your mouth. Your beard, meanwhile, is a thing of legend. Each week, your personal barber arrives, an artisan with hands as steady as a monk, transcribing the Psalms and a flair for the dramatic. He brings razors, scissors, combs, and enough scented oils to start a fire in a pinch. The beard is trimmed, shaped, sometimes curled or braided if you're feeling adventurous. If you're not into facial hair, he'll offer you the latest in clean-shaven styles. The kind of look that says, yes, I can afford hot water and 10 minutes of someone else's time. Eyebrows? Plucked or tamed, depending on whether you're hoping to look mysterious or just mildly concerned. But the barber is a multitasker. Haircuts are just the beginning. He is also your go-to for minor surgery, tooth pulling, and, on occasion, bleeding you with a leech just in case. Barbers are trusted with secrets, both medical and social. If you want the castle's latest gossip, just ask your barber. He knows who's hiding a rash, who's getting married, and who's hiding in the East Tower just for some peace and quiet. Now, let's talk perfume. You're not just clean, you are fragrant. You commission little bottles of rose water, orange blossom, imported ambergris, and, for the truly bold, musk from animals you've never seen but definitely wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. Each morning, a servant presents you with your fragrance options. Something subtle for breakfast, or shall we go full diplomatic meeting? You settle on a blend guaranteed to confuse both dear and neighboring nobles. And what about hair? If you're a man, it's trimmed, curled, and maybe dusted with powder that smells faintly of cinnamon. If you're a woman, the process is even more complex. Combing, braiding, pinning, and decorating with ribbons, veils, or even a gold net. Hair is so precious it's occasionally washed with egg yolk or honey, followed by vigorous complaints about stickiness. But at the end, you shine, sometimes literally. Nails, too, are a marker of status. Your hands are so soft you've forgotten what a callus feels like. A servant gently buffs your nails, sometimes with a lemon, sometimes with a cloth dipped in wine, because you're classy like that. Occasionally, you let your nails grow a little too long, mostly as a conversation piece. "How do you do anything?" asks your cousin. You smile, because the answer is obvious. I don't. By the time you're finished, you look, smell, and feel like a Renaissance painting, if Renaissance paintings were more honest about dental anxiety. You are as close to perfection as medieval grooming science allows, swaddled in scents, sparkling teeth, and the deep, unshakable knowledge that whatever the peasants are doing to clean themselves, it isn't nearly this fun. You step into the corridor, head high, beard or chin immaculate, breath spicy and mysterious, ready to face the day's many challenges, so long as those challenges don't involve strong winds or biting into a stale loaf of bread. Every day is a runway show, and the audience is whoever you make eye contact with. Velvet, silk, and rare dyes signal to the world that you are both rich and highly flammable. Your hat alone costs more than a small village. And your shoes? Good luck actually walking anywhere in them. Let's be honest, in the medieval world, your outfit isn't just a statement, it's a declaration of war. The battlefields are castle corridors and market squares, and the weapons of choice are brocade sleeves, bejeweled buckles, and fur capes so long they require a dedicated page boy just to keep them from dragging in the goose droppings. Forget camouflage. Here, the brighter and more bizarre your ensemble, the more status you command. Dressing up is less about comfort, more about sending a clear message. I have money, taste, and absolutely no plans to kneel in a field today. Start with the basics. Color. In a world where most people wear shades of dirt, you, the affluent, parade around in a rainbow. Not just any colors, either. You opt for crimson, imperial purple, and lapis lazuli blue. The sort of dyes that require international trade routes and, in one case, enough crushed insects to make a vegetarian faint. Wearing scarlet means everyone knows you're loaded. Wearing black velvet says you can afford a second set, because good luck getting stains out of that. Then there's fabric. Wool is for peasants, linen is for summer, but the true elite swathe themselves in silk that gleams like moonlight and brocade, so heavy you need a post-breakfast nap. Your tunics are padded, your sleeves stuffed, and your cloaks, well, let's just say that if you tripped on a staircase, you'd bounce. Furs are layered for status, not warmth, and the only thing softer than your ermine-lined cuffs is the look of envy on your rival's face when they see them. Accessories are essential. Your belt buckle is encrusted with gemstones and large enough to double as a serving platter. Your shoes? Think fashion victim, but make it literal. They're pointy, curled, and sometimes so elongated you have to tie them to your knees to avoid accidental jousting incidents. Sumptuary laws, those annoying rules about what people like you can wear, are really just a challenge to find new loopholes. If the law says no more than 2 rings per finger, you commission gloves made entirely of rings. And let's not forget the hat. Your hat is a statement piece. Maybe it's a towering hennin draped with a veil that's visible from the next village, or perhaps a jaunty velvet cap covered in jewels, peacock feathers, or the entire tail of something unidentifiable but definitely expensive. The hat is less about keeping your head warm and more about letting everyone in church know you could have funded the new steeple yourself, if only you cared to. Getting dressed each morning is a strategy session. You weigh alliances. Didn't Lord Gerald wear blue yesterday? Consider your enemies. I'll outshine Lady Blanche if it kills me, and prepare for the inevitable scandal if you repeat an outfit. The goal is to impress, intimidate, and remind everyone that not only are you wealthy, but you're dangerously creative. Of course, no one expects you to actually move in these clothes. Sitting, standing, and waving from balconies are your primary forms of exercise. Walking is strictly for emergencies or the grand parade into the banquet hall, always at a pace slow enough to keep the servants on their toes, and the crowd whispering about how you managed to balance so many accessories without toppling over. At the end of the day, you peel off the layers and marvel at the sheer effort required to stay ahead of the fashion arms race. You might be exhausted, slightly itchy, and unable to feel your feet, but you know you've won. In the game of medieval style, victory belongs to the bold, the beautiful, and those who dare to flex with fabric, even if it means bursting into flames every time you pass too close to a candelabra. Why sit on a normal bench when you could have a servant holding a pillow for your elbows? The medieval elite are surrounded by a small army of attendants, cooks, torchbearers, cupbearers, and people whose entire job is to make sure your bathwater isn't too tepid. It's luxurious, confusing, and just a little bit awkward. Let's start with the numbers. In your average castle, you have more staff than you have cousins, and that's saying something. There's the steward, who manages everything so you don't have to, tracking expenses, collecting rents, and politely ignoring the fact that you never remember anyone's name. Under him, the housekeeper runs a tight ship, barking orders at a legion of maids who can make a four-poster bed look like a royal cloud and polish your silver until it's visible from France. Cooks dominate the kitchen. There's a master cook, a spit boy, a pie maker, and someone whose job it is just to yell, "Out of the way," as hot pots go flying. Every meal is a theatrical production. One servant stirring the pot, another tasting for poison, and a third arranging the cheese platter with military precision. It's not just about eating, it's about spectacle. There's even a dedicated egg servant who carries around a basket of precious eggs and looks faintly terrified at all times. Because if the Baron's omelette is runny, heads might metaphorically roll. The cupbearer is a position of immense trust. Because if someone's going to poison you, it'll probably be through your drink. This is the person who takes a cautious sip of everything before it reaches your lips, living on the edge, and probably developing an impressive tolerance for suspicious aftertastes. The torchbearers, meanwhile, are human light switches, following you from room to room, holding flaming brands at just the right angle to illuminate your cheekbones without setting your hat on fire. And then there are the personal attendants. The ones who brush your hair, buckle your shoes, and occasionally hold your mirror so you can admire yourself from all angles. Some days, you have so many people following you around that entering a room feels like launching a very awkward parade. There's a professional reader who recites poetry when you're feeling literary, and a musician who stands quietly in the corner, plucking a lute whenever conversation lags. The bath is a production all its own. Water bearers haul buckets upstairs, someone stirs in the rose petals, and yet another servant tests the temperature with a delicate toe before you deign to enter. When you emerge, towels are offered, limbs are patted dry, and the entire staff works with the silent coordination of a pit crew at a royal chariot race. If you ask nicely, someone will even comb the tangles out of your hair, assuming you haven't frightened them away with last night's garlic feast. Occasionally, things get a little personal. There's the unfortunate squire who's promoted to pillow holder and must kneel for hours, supporting your elbow while you nap. There are footmen whose only job is to carry your chair from one end of the hall to the other, in case you suddenly feel inspired to sit somewhere new. And if you're hosting a banquet, there's the ancient and slightly terrifying tradition of human furniture. Young pages, selected for their sturdy knees, might spend the entire evening kneeling in strategic spots so that your honored guests can prop their feet up and feel truly important. Naturally, there's a hierarchy. Servants compete for the top jobs, the ones with access to juicy gossip and a share of the leftover wine. The smartest rise through the ranks, eventually running the estate, while the less ambitious are left to sweep, dust, or stand in drafty hallways waiting for someone to need a hat retrieved from across the room. You, meanwhile, float serenely through all of this, surrounded by people, rarely alone, and so thoroughly cared for that the only thing you really have to worry about is what you'll do if the bed-warming servant calls in sick. In a world where comfort is king, the greatest luxury isn't gold or jewels. It's having an entire population dedicated to making sure you never, ever have to lift your own pillow. Your daily workload consists of sitting in a chair, staring thoughtfully at a ledger, and occasionally nodding while your steward explains why the harvest is late. Paperwork is just someone else's problem, unless it involves ordering new falcons or organizing a tax increase. To the untrained eye, you're the CEO of your own sprawling medieval conglomerate, overseeing lands, people, livestock, and enough grain to stage a minor bread-based uprising. In reality, your main management skill is staying awake while someone else does the managing. Each morning, you settle into your office, which is just the warmest spot in the solar, preferably near a window so you can daydream while pretending to study estate documents. Your desk is a sturdy table, hand-carved, and usually covered in more crumbs than contracts. Your steward, a master of patience, numbers, and explaining things politely for the third time, arrives carrying a stack of ledgers that might as well be written in ancient Sumerian. He bows, coughs, and begins the day's update. The East Field is flooded, 2 pigs have gone missing, and the village miller wants to discuss his feelings. You nod sagely, occasionally grunting in agreement, while secretly focusing on the more pressing issue, whether today's snack will be candied figs or honey cakes. The real work is all about delegation. The reeve supervises the peasants, the bailiff keeps the peace, and the steward makes sure you never have to touch anything resembling a shovel. If a decision must be made, say, about crop rotation or which peasant gets promoted to chief scarecrow, your job is to listen with a furrowed brow, murmur something about tradition, and sign wherever they point. Sometimes you ask thoughtful questions like, "Will this affect my wine deliveries?" Or, "Do we have enough swan for the autumn feast?" The answer is always yes, my lord, even when it's definitely not. Occasionally, paperwork does find its way to your lap, usually in the form of an official scroll, sealed with wax and wrapped in so much ribbon it could double as a festive garter. You pretend to read it, make a mental note to have someone else actually read it, and return to the far more important task of doodling pictures of jousting unicorns in the margins. Estate management meetings are legendary for their length and inefficiency. They often take place just before lunch, ensuring no one is actually paying attention. The steward reads lists of expenses, wool, candles, mysterious miscellaneous poultry charges, and the occasional debt owed by your third cousin twice removed who you vaguely remember owing you money in the first place. If anyone disagrees, you resolve it with a time-honored tactic. Declare a hunting party and leave the room. Your only true responsibility? Prestige projects. Need to upgrade the dovecote. Approve. New bells for the chapel? Approve. Want to order a dozen exotic falcons from the distant east? Absolutely approve, and add a note to have someone write a poem about it. Tax increases are approached delicately. You never collect them yourself, of course, but you do enjoy inventing new, slightly ridiculous taxes. A window tax, a mud tax, even a wearing too much brown tax if you're feeling especially whimsical. Sometimes there's a real crisis, a sheep uprising, a mysterious crop circle, or a dramatic letter from the neighboring lord demanding you return his borrowed chess set. In these rare moments, you show true leadership. Delegate harder, look even more serious, and have the steward send back an apologetic pigeon. At the end of the day, you lean back in your oversized chair, basking in the knowledge that your estate is running smoothly, or at least running somewhere. You're the undisputed monarch of paperwork delegation, the master of ceremonial nods, and the undisputed champion of looking important while doing absolutely nothing. And if anything goes terribly wrong, well, that's what stewards are for. Cats are for witches. You have a pet monkey, a hunting falcon, and at least one animal so exotic it doesn't have a name in your language. Keeping wild beasts is the ultimate status symbol, even if it means occasionally getting bitten by something described as possibly poisonous. Let's be clear, if you're rich, you don't just own pets. You curate a living menagerie that serves one primary function: impressing everyone who sets foot in your great hall. A dog? Of course, but not just any dog. It must be large, with a pedigree longer than your family's, and preferably trained to retrieve not just game birds, but also dropped gloves, lost relatives, and on a good day, the dinner guest who fell asleep in the wine cellar. But a single dog will not do. You require variety. There are delicate lap dogs, bred to tremble elegantly on silk cushions and yip at peasants for fun. They wear little collars made from Italian silver and have names like Sir Barksalot III or Dame Yappington. They have no known skills except looking adorable while you pretend to listen to your steward's report on rising piglet costs. Then, of course, there are the birds. You, being a person of taste, own at least one falcon, probably two, just in case a guest tries to show off with their own. The falcons perch regally on velvet-wrapped stands, staring at everyone as if silently judging their clothing choices. You occasionally take them hunting, but mostly you just parade them around the garden while the staff chase after with tiny hoods and even tinier snacks. If you're feeling adventurous, you might have a tame owl, useful for dramatic midnight brooding, but less practical for any actual letter delivery, despite what the local wizard claims. But the real flex is in the truly strange animals. Monkeys are all the rage. Capuchins, macaques, or whatever happened to wander off a trade ship and survive the journey. The monkey is both a pet and a walking conversation starter, swinging from curtain rods and occasionally stealing pastries at formal dinners. You've had to apologize for your monkey's behavior more than once. Once, it bit the bishop's toe, which is now a running joke in church sermons about humility. And why stop there? You have a rare lizard, which might just be a slightly green snake, a miniature deer from a land no one can pronounce, and, for a glorious 3 weeks, something the merchant swore was a firefox. It turned out to be a very fast, mildly flammable squirrel, but you made the best of it by naming it Sir Sparks. Every so often, you attend a feast at a rival noble's estate and see something truly wild, a peacock dyed gold, a leopard on a chain, or a Persian guinea fowl, which is definitely just a chicken with a story. Of course, keeping all these animals happy is a full-time job for someone else. There's the master of hounds, the falconer, the chief monkey wrangler, a recently invented role, and several unfortunate grooms who have to clean out cages and explain to guests why there's a mongoose in the privy. The household budget for animal feed alone could fund a small rebellion. It's not just about animals, though. Rich people's pastimes are equally outlandish. You might dabble in falconry, yes, but you also host tournaments, invent new ball games, or sponsor traveling musicians who sing about your monkey's exploits. You can afford to be bored in style. Chess with hand-carved ivory pieces, poetry competitions, and hours spent watching jesters try to juggle geese. Sure, there are hazards. The monkey might steal your rings, the falcon might decide to nap mid-hunt, and once your rare lizard went missing only to turn up in the bishop's shoe. But such is the price of luxury. Living surrounded by creatures so unique that even you can't remember all their names, or, sometimes, where you left them. And as you recline in your solar, monkey on one shoulder, falcon on the other, you know you've reached the true height of medieval prestige. You're not just the lord of the manor, you're the ringmaster of the castle zoo. Lunch is a parade of roasted fowl, river fish, pies with more layers than a royal family tree, and bread that's mostly there to catch drips of gravy. The more courses, the higher your social rank, and the more you regret it after the third helping of swan. In the world of medieval wealth, lunchtime is less a meal and more a public exhibition of both your stomach and your status. It starts with the arrival of guests, all meticulously seated according to a flowchart that only your steward understands. You're at the head of the table, beneath a tapestry so large it could double as a ship's sail, flanked by relatives you only sort of remember meeting at your christening. First to arrive, the birds. Partridges roasted golden and glazed with honey. Quails so tiny and delicate, you need 2 just to feel like you've eaten something. And a peacock, served, naturally, with all its feathers reattached for effect, because nothing says excess like taxidermy on a platter. For the health-conscious, there's the occasional boiled crane. No one eats it, but it looks impressive, and that's really what matters. The fish are next. River trout, stuffed with herbs, eels coiled artistically on wooden boards, and the ever-present threat of a carp pie, an experiment in both gastronomy and structural engineering. Your chef, who claims to have studied with the French, or maybe just met one once, unveils his masterpiece. A pie with so many layers you're convinced there are still parts of it being built as you eat. The crust is thick, golden, and studded with mysterious seeds that may or may not be edible. The bread is everywhere, but no one actually eats it for the bread itself. Instead, you use it as a medieval napkin, soaking up gravy, oil, and the occasional tear of regret after your third helping of heron. The loaves come in all shapes and sizes, round, long, braided, and for special guests, one shaped like a jousting lance. Occasionally, someone carves their initials into the crust just to prove they were there. Accompanying all of this are side dishes designed to confuse and impress. Salads of foraged greens and wildflowers, jellies molded into the shapes of saints, and candied nuts. Because if you're not eating something sweet before dinner, are you even trying? The servants circle the room with pitchers of watered wine, cider, and something called mead that tastes suspiciously like regret. The table talk is lively, a little gossip, a little politics, and the obligatory argument over who saw the rarest bird last summer. After the initial rush, the specials come out. Someone always tries to top last week's spectacle, maybe a roasted swan, elegantly trussed and looking personally offended by the whole experience. Maybe a goose with fruit stuffed inside, and a tiny crown perched on its beak. For the record, the servants have a running bet on which guest will cave and try the pigeon tart. Answer, always the new guy. There's little room for subtlety. The more elaborate the lunch, the more likely you are to spend the rest of the afternoon in a soft food coma, reclining on embroidered cushions while a musician plucks soothing melodies in the background. If you're lucky, you'll avoid the post-lunch entertainment, usually a poetry reading or an ill-fated attempt at juggling by your youngest cousin. Eventually, the platters are cleared, the crumbs are swept, and the guests waddle off to nap, stroll, or quietly loosen their belts. You are left to contemplate the true meaning of excess. Full stomach, slightly greasy fingers, and the uneasy knowledge that you're expected to do it all again at dinner. Because in the medieval upper class, lunch isn't just a meal, it's an endurance test, a feathered spectacle, and a reminder that you really need to pace yourself. Being rich in the Middle Ages is exhausting, mostly because you spend so much time being horizontal, whether it's chess, poetry, falconry, or inventing tennis. The key is to avoid anything that smells remotely like actual work. Let's set the scene. The feast is over, the afternoon sun is streaming through the window. Filtered, of course, through leaded glass so thick you're basically getting vitamin D in installments. And you have the next several hours to fill with activities so unproductive, they'd make a modern self-help guru weep. Productivity, for the medieval elite, means successfully napping without creasing your doublet. Your first stop? The solar, a fancy word for the castle's best-lit lounging room. Here, you stretch out on a cushioned bench, one leg artfully draped, gazing at the ceiling beams and pondering the complexities of life, like whether you'd rather be reincarnated as a falcon or a wheel of cheese. Around you, your companions are similarly sprawled. One cousin dozes behind a screen, another pokes half-heartedly at a lute, and the third is deep into a book that's mostly just illuminated pictures and several prayers for not falling asleep on duty. Leisure, for the rich, is a group sport. Chess sets are brought out, carved from ivory and scented wood. You play a few moves, then immediately abandon the game when you realize your opponent is actually good at it. Poetry readings are a thing too. Some noble guests take turns reciting their latest verses about love, God, or how difficult it is to find good linen these days. You pretend to listen, occasionally nodding along while mentally composing a limerick about the neighbor's donkey. If you feel like flexing your animal collection, falconry is always an option. You stroll out to the garden, arm encased in a leather glove, bird perched imperiously, servants trailing behind with treats, bells, and a backup falcon in case the first one gets ideas above its station. You watch the falcon swoop and dive, marvel at its grace, and then wander back inside, absolutely winded by the effort of standing in the sun for a whole 15 minutes. Sports? Absolutely. Just not anything that involves breaking a sweat. You and your guests experiment with hitting balls around the courtyard with wooden bats, a pastime that's halfway between tennis and organized confusion. Everyone agrees it's excellent exercise for the servants retrieving the balls. If you really want to move, You might attempt a gentle stroll along the gallery, pausing to admire tapestries, gossip about mutual acquaintances, or test how many steps it takes before someone offers you a chair. Daytime drinking is not just allowed, it's encouraged. You sip spiced wine or honeyed mead from goblets the size of a toddler, careful not to spill on your velvet sleeves. Sometimes you sample a mysterious liqueur sent by a neighboring lord, occasionally regretting it, especially if it doubles as cough medicine. Drinking is part ritual, part status symbol, and part necessity for surviving another round of your uncle's stories about the time he nearly caught a fish this big. Occasionally, you're expected to join in a group game, charades, with much more shouting, dice, or blind man's bluff played with all the enthusiasm of people who know they could just go back to napping. The staff watches in awe at the sheer stamina required to move so little and still require 3 outfit changes. By late afternoon, you're sprawled in a sunbeam, shoes off, surrounded by the gentle hum of snoring relatives and distant music. You might write a letter, commission a new tapestry, or simply enjoy the one true luxury of wealth, time spent doing absolutely, gloriously nothing. Because in the medieval upper class, mastering the art of leisure is harder than it looks. And if you do it right, no one will ever suspect just how much effort it took to perfect the fine art of not working at all. There's no Instagram, so you flaunt your lifestyle with public banquets, family crests, and the time-honored tradition of hiring a bard to tell everyone how great you are. If your neighbor's feast has a juggler, yours will have a fire-breathing bear on stilts. The competition is fierce. In the Middle Ages, clout is measured not in likes and follows, but in the number of musicians you can cram into a banquet hall without starting a turf war. Forget hashtags. Your coat of arms is your social handle, and it's displayed on everything. Tapestries, shields, dinner plates, even the family dog, who, for the record, is not thrilled about being an ambassador for House Barkington. The day's top trend? Feasts. Every social climber knows that a lavish banquet is the only way to show off your wealth, taste, and ability to source fresh figs in February. Invitations are handwritten by your best scribe, sealed with enough wax to build a new candle, and delivered by servants trained to look mysterious and slightly bored. A truly ambitious noble will even send a few accidental invites to rivals, just so everyone can see what they're missing. Your great hall transforms for the event. Rushes are scattered on the floor, the medieval equivalent of a red carpet, and the walls are hung with your boldest, most colourful tapestries, preferably ones featuring dragons, victorious ancestors, or that one time your great-aunt allegedly defeated a wolf in single combat. Heralds practice their best bellows, ready to introduce each guest as if they're entering a wrestling match. Seating arrangements are critical. The closer to the host, the higher your status, and the better your odds of getting first pick of the stuffed pheasant. There's a hierarchy to everything. Who gets the gold goblet? Who's stuck with the pewter? And who, tragically, must make do with a cup that's only slightly cracked? Subtle flexes abound. Your new doublet? Conveniently forgotten on the back of your chair. Your signet ring? Adjusted repeatedly so everyone at the table can admire it between bites. Of course, the menu is pure theatre. Courses arrive in waves. Roasted swans, entire boars with apples in their mouths, pies that release live doves when cut. An idea that sounds poetic until the doves start panicking under the rafters. Jesters perform, minstrels serenade, and dancers twirl dangerously close to the soup tureens. If the neighbouring baron had jugglers, you counter with fire-breathers, acrobats, or a troop of trained goats. One-upmanship is the name of the game. You want people to leave whispering, "Did you see the dessert course? I heard it cost more than my manor." When dinner conversation lulls, gossip is served hot and fresh. Scandal travels faster than a messenger on horseback. You lean in for a juicy tidbit about Lady Eleanor's new companion, or the rumour that Sir Reginald's family crest is actually just a stylized beetroot. Some nobles even commission poets to immortalize their best quips, ensuring that every joke is preserved for posterity. and for next year's feast when it inevitably resurfaces. If you're feeling especially bold, you hire a bard to sing your praises mid-meal, recounting your glorious victories in battle, your generosity to the poor, and the time you almost possibly saved a drowning cat. Bonus points if the song has enough verses to get stuck in everyone's head for a week. And for those who can't attend, don't worry, they'll hear all about it anyway. The servants will spread the word, merchants will exaggerate, and soon your feast will be the talk of 3 counties, with details growing more ridiculous at every retelling. I heard he served pudding made of gold, and the main course was a unicorn. I swear, because in the world of medieval social media, your legacy isn't digital, it's dinner. And the only thing harder than living up to your own hype is planning next month's feast. Hosting is an extreme sport. The wine flows, the meat piles up, and the guests eventually pass out on your tapestries. Meanwhile, you smile graciously while plotting how to outdo this at your next event. Bonus points if no one accidentally sets the house on fire. From the moment your first guest arrives, you're on high alert. There are more protocols than at a royal investiture, and twice as much potential for chaos. Guests are greeted in the grand entry hall, where their names are shouted by a herald who still can't pronounce half of them. Your steward makes sure everyone's shoes are relatively clean before they step on the imported rugs. And your best dogs are confined to avoid unfortunate accidents on the noble women's silk trains. The evening begins with a round of formal welcomes. Everyone bows or curtsies with just the right amount of effort. Too little, and it's a snub. Too much, and you're clearly up to something. Conversation starts stiff. The weather, the price of wheat, the latest feud between second cousins, and that time Lord Geoffrey's wig caught fire during a solstice toast. But give it an hour and 2 rounds of mulled wine, and suddenly your hall is alive with stories, laughter, and very loud debates over who can whistle the loudest. Dinner is where things get serious. Platters arrive in parade formation. Roast boar, glazed partridges, whole baked fish, and a pie so large the kitchen staff could hide in it if things go wrong. You nod approvingly as your guests marvel over the swan in sauce and the stuffed quails, even as you try to remember whether you ever actually liked swan in the first place. There's enough food to feed an army, and by midnight, it's every guest for themselves at the dessert table, armed with spoons, wit, and questionable etiquette. Wine, mead, and ale flow like rivers in spring. You watch with practiced amusement as Lord Thomas, 4 goblets deep, tries to serenade the household cats, and Lady Beatrice challenges the jester to a dance-off. The best parties, after all, are the ones people can't quite remember, but are desperate to piece together the next morning. You keep a mental tally of who's most likely to fall asleep in the garden, and who should never be left alone with the family silver. Entertainment is both an art and a high-stakes gamble. Minstrels roam the hall, hoping to be tipped in coin, pie, or both. Jugglers toss torches dangerously close to the tapestries, and acrobats attempt feats better suited to open courtyards than crowded dining rooms. For every elegant court dance, there's a group game that devolves into chaos. Blind man's bluff, charades, or a competitive bout of who can eat the most candied chestnuts without crying. As the night deepens, decorum peels away layer by layer. Someone inevitably loses a shoe. Dueling banjos break out between rival musicians. A dog steals a roast, prompting an impromptu chase through the solar. And you smile benignly as a well-meaning cousin tries to borrow your favorite hat for the after-party. Your staff, meanwhile, orchestrates the cleanup like a silent ballet, removing empty goblets, herding sleepy guests toward guest chambers, and making a note of every minor incident for tomorrow's gossip session. You tiptoe around the snoring uncle who has claimed your best armchair, and quietly relocate the guest who passed out beneath the dessert table. Nothing breaks the spell of medieval festivity quite like a surprise visit from the chamber pot. When dawn arrives, only the bravest are still awake, mumbling about one last round and swapping stories destined to become legend. You stand at the threshold, exhausted but triumphant. If nothing burned down, no one was arrested, and only 3 people required gentle reminders about their behavior, you've hosted a roaring success. Because in the game of medieval hospitality, the only rule is this: outdo everyone, survive the aftermath, and be ready to do it all over again next feast day. Sure, you have gold plates, but the castle still floods when it rains. The peasants want higher wages, again, and there's always a rumor about the plague in the next county. Life at the top is mostly worrying about things you pay other people to worry about. Let's start with plumbing, or, as it's known in the castle, that series of unfortunate drips. You have a garderobe hanging over the moat, which seemed ingenious on the architect's drawing but turns out to be less private convenience and more seasonal water feature. When it rains, water pours through cracks in the tower roof, running merrily down the walls and pooling in the grand hallway, where it's promptly mopped up by a servant who is still convinced you're hiding a second bucket somewhere. Sometimes, the castle moat rises to greet you right at your own doorstep, and you have to deploy the flooding footman brigade, an elite squad armed with mops, buckets, and the bitter resolve of people who know this will happen again next week. Even the luxury of hot water is a gamble. It requires boiling dozens of buckets in the kitchen and hauling them up spiral stairs with the speed and coordination of a medieval fire drill. The end result? Tepid, slightly smoky bathwater, and servants so exhausted they might just join you in the tub out of protest. But plumbing woes are nothing compared to peasant problems. Your estate is run by people who expect to be paid, fed, and not actively freezing to death in the winter. The nerve. Every spring, they arrive to humbly request better wages, more bread, or slightly fewer hours picking rocks out of the Lord's vegetable patch. You nod gravely, promise to discuss it with the steward, and then distract everyone with a feast or the announcement of a new, incredibly important ditch-digging project. Peasant complaints are a daily occurrence. The hayloft is leaking, the cows are sad, someone's uncle keeps wandering into the wrong fields, and last year's festival ended with a sheep in the cider barrel. You keep a list of grievances somewhere on your desk, right next to the list of people you'll never actually invite to dinner. Occasionally, you throw your subjects a bone, a new well, an extra Sunday off, or a winter cloak so itchy it could be used as sandpaper. Generosity, after all, is the best way to remind everyone who has the power. Then there's pestilence. Being rich doesn't make you immune to medieval health scares. It just means you get your news earlier and your rumors more exaggerated. The moment someone sneezes in the next county, you hear about it by lunch, and by dinner, you're considering moving your entire household to the summer castle, where, ironically, the rats are friendlier, but the draft is worse. Your personal physician assures you that the best prevention is a strong diet of onions, wine, and not associating with peasants. Your chaplain offers prayers, your steward suggests lighting more candles, and your personal apothecary recommends a pungent poultice you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. You try all 3, just in case, and then spend the rest of the evening pondering the logistics of quarantining your most talkative relatives in the turret. In quieter moments, you reflect on these rich people's problems: the leaking roof, the grumbling staff, the ever-present threat of catching something from the laundry basket. Yet, these are the headaches of the highborn. You delegate, you delay, and you dabble in half-hearted reforms, confident that whatever problem you face, someone else will be along shortly to carry it away, preferably on a silver tray. And when things get especially dire, you remind yourself that, for all its annoyances, being at the top means never having to deal with any problem directly. That's what stewards, bailiffs, and a very forgiving priest are for. Marriage isn't about love, it's about acquiring more land, more gold, and occasionally a spouse who can play the lute without crying. Negotiations are tense, the dowries are enormous, and the only romance is in the legal documents. Welcome to medieval matchmaking, where your family tree is less a story of romance and more a complicated flowchart of alliances, property, and strategic in-law management. Your parents started looking for your soulmate when you were still teething. In the high-stakes game of noble unions, you're not picking a partner. You're picking a business partner with good bone structure. First, there are the matchmakers. Forget your modern dating apps. Here, the go-between is a middle-aged relative with a memory for gossip and a nose for scandal. They know who's available, who's recently acquired a sheep farm, and who is in disgrace after that incident with the juggler and the bishop's hat. They draw up lists, compare fortunes, and try to ensure no one's marrying a cousin closer than fourth degree. Most of the time. The first meeting is less candlelight and poetry, more boardroom merger. You're presented to your potential spouse in the presence of all relevant parents, grandparents, and lawyers. Conversation topics include: what are your grain yields? Do you own any functional watermills? And have you ever been excommunicated? Even a little. If your future beloved can answer in complete sentences, it's a win. Next come the negotiations. Dowries are calculated with the intensity of an international arms treaty. Land, livestock, cash, and jewelry are all up for grabs. Sometimes there's a bonus, an orchard, a particularly lovely suit of armor, or, in very rare cases, the family jester thrown in to sweeten the deal. Lawyers hover at the edge of the room, ready to pounce if anyone tries to sneak in a clause about return policies. When an agreement is finally reached, usually after 3 days, 4 arguments, and at least one threat to call the abbot, the engagement is announced with a feast. It's less about the happy couple, more about showing off to everyone who lost out in the matchmaking wars. If you're lucky, your future spouse is taller than you remember, reasonably clean, and possesses most of their own teeth. If not, you comfort yourself by daydreaming about all the extra fields you just acquired. The wedding itself is an event, equal parts festival, legal proceeding, and endurance test. The church is filled with flowers, nervous relatives, and at least 3 people trying to outdo each other with hats. You recite your vows, which are more about property transfer than undying affection, and exchange rings while the guests discreetly size up the wedding gifts. As for romance, that's a luxury for later. You and your new partner bond over shared business interests, harvest quotas, peasant management, and the endless challenge of keeping the family accounts balanced. Date nights involve sitting by the hearth and tallying the number of cows that survived the winter. The closest you get to intimacy is when you both agree the kitchen roof needs patching. Of course, every couple aspires to be the original power couple, the ones who manage to actually like each other, combine estates, and host feasts so grand that even the bishop gossips about them. You attend tournaments, dance at banquets, and try to look lovingly at one another while silently calculating the tax benefits of your union. In the end, a successful marriage isn't judged by passion, but by property lines and annual yields. If you produce a few healthy heirs, avoid scandal, and manage to enjoy a lute duet now and then, you're doing better than most. Because in the medieval world, true love might be rare, but well-negotiated contracts are forever. Your children are tiny, entitled dynamos in velvet capes, tutored by monks and already developing opinions about architecture. They have pet squirrels, call everyone peasant, and believe the world smells like cinnamon and entitlement. Let's set the scene. The nursery is more lavish than most people's houses. Thick carpets, a roaring fireplace, and toy soldiers carved from rare woods, each painted in the family colors and, in one unfortunate case, chewed by the family dog. The children themselves emerge each morning dressed in miniature replicas of adult finery, swaddled in layers of embroidered linen and sporting tiny boots with buckles so shiny they double as signal mirrors for passing knights. Education is, of course, a top priority. Monks arrive at dawn, armed with scrolls, slates, and the patience of saints. Lessons start with Latin, progress to French, and usually detour into spirited debates about whether dragons are real. And if so, who in the family could take one in a fight? Math is introduced gently, counting loaves, measuring land, and dividing up imaginary herds of unicorns. If your child can recite the entire family lineage back 6 generations by age 7, you're on the right track. If they can do it in 3 languages, it's time to commission a new tapestry. But learning is only part of the experience. There are etiquette lessons: how to bow without tipping over, how to curtsy while holding a sweetmeat, and how to issue polite yet devastating insults to rivals at the midsummer festival. The children practice signature moves, from the imperious stare to the begrudging wave, all under the watchful eye of a governess who secretly dreams of retiring to a small, child-free village. Of course, with privilege comes creativity. No ordinary pets for these little lords and ladies. One child insists on training a squirrel to fetch grapes, while another starts a fashion trend by tying ribbons around the family goose. There are heated debates over who gets the window seat in the schoolroom, who can ride the fastest pony, and why the youngest sibling gets away with murder, or at least with dipping the family crest in jam. Their days are packed with hobbies: jousting practice with hobby horses, staging elaborate puppet shows where all the villains suspiciously resemble rival noble families, and organizing treasure hunts that always end with someone getting lost in the linen closet. Occasionally, they help in the kitchen by demanding cakes shaped like castles and critiquing the spices in the mulled wine. Too much clove, cook, peasant mistake. Discipline is a delicate dance. You try to raise them strong but humble, only to watch as they argue over who gets the shiniest goblet at lunch and turn their noses up at anything less than peacock pie. Every request is delivered with the confident authority of a pint-sized monarch. The phrase, "Do you know who my parents are?" is bandied about so frequently that the servants create a polite rotation system for pretending not to. Still, there are moments of genuine charm. The children organize charity drives, donating old socks to the local monastery, stage mock parliaments, in which the cat is inevitably elected king, and sometimes sneak into the kitchens at midnight to inspect the pie situation. Their laughter echoes through the castle halls, a reminder that beneath the layers of entitlement and velvet, there's still a spark of unfiltered joy. You watch your children grow, outspoken, brilliant, just a little insufferable, and dream of the day when they, too, will have to explain to their own heirs why pet squirrels aren't a good idea indoors. Because in the medieval upper class, the greatest legacy isn't land or gold, but a generation who expects the world to bend just slightly in their favor, preferably while wearing matching hats. Your children are tiny, entitled dynamos in velvet capes, tutored by monks, and already developing opinions about architecture. They have pet squirrels, call everyone peasant, and believe the world smells like cinnamon and entitlement. Their day begins with a ceremonial awakening, nursemaids bustling about, draping the windows with embroidered linens, and the resident lapdog already warming the foot of the cradle. Each child emerges from a pile of blankets with a yawn and a royal proclamation about the breakfast menu, typically demanding honeyed oats, but not the way Cook did them yesterday. The youngest one insists her eggs be served in a golden goblet, which she proceeds to ignore in favor of eating with her fingers. Schooling starts early. A monk, bald, patient, and slightly cross-eyed from years of deciphering family trees, arrives to teach Latin, sums, and, for the oldest, how to commission flattering portraits. Lessons are interrupted only by loud debates about whose imaginary dragon would win in a joust, or who gets to ride the family pony first. The answer is always the loudest child. The schoolroom itself is a battleground of tiny wooden swords, quills, and ink stains in the shape of the family crest. Etiquette lessons follow. Your children learn to bow just deeply enough to impress the visiting bishop, but not so low as to look desperate. The art of the dismissive wave is taught alongside the subtle eye roll, crucial for navigating the treacherous waters of dinner with rival noble families. The eldest daughter is a master of feigned politeness, able to thank a suitor for a wilted bouquet with a tone that suggests he should have brought a castle instead. Pet ownership in your household is not for the faint of heart. Pet squirrels scamper along the tapestry rods, occasionally leaping into the pudding. The middle son has trained his goose to honk disapproval at anything less than velvet bedding, and the youngest swears her dormouse is the reincarnation of a famous knight. The staff have given up trying to keep the animals out of the formal drawing room, now resigned to the fact that feeding the menagerie is part of their job description. The afternoon is reserved for noble hobbies. There's miniature jousting in the corridor, using the new footstools as obstacles, puppet plays about daring princesses and bumbling knights, and the occasional attempt to build a working catapult out of spoons and leftover bread crusts. When bored, the children host mock feasts for their dolls and pets, assigning elaborate titles like Duke of Cheese or Marchioness of Marmalade. Discipline, of course, is handled with medieval creativity. If a child misbehaves, they're sentenced to an audience with the portrait of great-grandfather Ethelred, a painting so stern it reduces even the naughtiest child to silent repentance. Other times, a brief exile to the chilly East Tower to reflect on one's choices is enough to inspire remorse, or at least creative plotting for next time. Yet, beneath the layers of entitlement and velvet, your children have moments of surprising sweetness. They share pastries with the kitchen boys, sneak bread to the chickens, and sometimes even remember to thank the maids. Their laughter ricochets down stone corridors, echoing with the sound of a new generation already planning to take over the castle, or, at minimum, the pantry. In the end, you realize your true legacy isn't the family crest, the silver, or even the lands. It's these spirited little brats, galloping through the halls, inventing new ways to demand pie, and growing up just as convinced as you once were that the world revolves around them and their favorite squirrel. You have so much cash it's measured in chests. Most of it goes toward buying land, bribing officials, and paying for shoes that could double as siege weapons. Accounting is done by candlelight, with the family motto, "Spend now, figure it out next century." Let's talk numbers. Every noble dreams of an overflowing treasury. Gold coins, silver marks, and copper bits jingling in embroidered pouches, secreted away in the deepest vaults of the castle. You don't count your wealth, you weigh it. At tax time, the steward heaves out the largest chest, dusts off the lid, and opens it with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for holy relics. A hush falls over the room, broken only by the sound of coins clinking and your cousin whispering, "We should definitely buy a bigger moat." First, you buy land. Lots of it. Fields, forests, vineyards, and villages. All parceled out and marked on maps so complex they look like medieval board games. The more land you have, the more rent you collect, the more peasants you have to manage, and the more likely it is you'll one day discover a distant field has been annexed by sheep with strong opinions about property law. Then there are the bribes. Officially, they're called gifts or tokens of gratitude. Unofficially, they're the fastest way to make sure your taxes stay low, your wine stays duty-free, and your cousin's unfortunate poetry recital is quietly cancelled. You send casks of ale to the bailiff, a new cloak to the local judge, and an entire roasted ox to the bishop, who, in return, promises not to mention that incident with the alligator in last year's Easter sermon. Of course, fashion is a bottomless pit. The cost of staying stylish is astronomical. You're forever importing the latest fabrics from Florence, commissioning doublets covered in gold thread, and ordering hats so large they require a special storage room. The most recent pair of shoes you bought could repel an invading army and possibly injure someone if dropped from a balcony. You don't just buy for yourself. You buy for your whole household, because heaven forbid a visiting baron spots your squire in last season's leggings. Entertaining guests is another gold sinkhole. Every feast, tournament, and impromptu masquerade party costs a small fortune. Exotic spices, musicians, and acrobats on retainer. Each line item is enthusiastically scribbled into the ledger, even as your steward mutters something about budgetary restraint and perhaps fewer live bears at supper. But you know that a rich life is one spent hosting parties people will still talk about long after the tapestries have faded. But managing all this wealth is no small feat. Accounting is performed by candlelight, with ledgers so heavy they could double as battering rams. Your steward pores over lists, rents, tithes, tributes, fines, and miscellaneous expenditures, which seem to include everything from new falcon hoods to hush money for the local rumourmonger. Every now and then, you take a peek at the numbers, make a non-committal noise, and tell yourself it's all for the family legacy. You also invest, sort of. Money is lent to distant relatives, church-building funds, or merchants who promise to return with new spices and, inevitably, a wild story about pirates. Sometimes, you gamble. Dice games after dinner, a little too much mead, and suddenly half the wine cellar is riding on whether your horse can outrun the neighbor's goat. And when things get tight, usually after an especially extravagant feast or the purchase of a new suit of armor for your pet monkey, you do what nobles have always done. Raise the rents, invent a new tax, the peacock feather tariff, or quietly pawn a few family jewels until the next harvest. In the end, no matter how much you spend, more always finds its way in. Gold is the lifeblood of your status, the key to every door, and the reason your castle is both admired and envied across the land. So you keep spending, keep entertaining, and keep living large, secure in the knowledge that if anyone ever asks for a full account, you can always blame it on the last century's bookkeeping. Wealth means never having to say no to a trend, even when it's dangerous. You own shoes with 3-foot toes, a codpiece so large it has its own weather system, and more rings than you have fingers. Occasionally, sumptuary laws try to rein you in. Good luck with that. Let's face it. Being too rich in the Middle Ages is a full-time hobby, and you're the reigning champion. When you hear a new fashion has arrived from Florence, you don't just adopt it, you triple down. If someone says that hat's too tall, you commission one so high it brushes the chandeliers. You hear rumors that the king frowns on excessive pearls. You have your tailor sew them into your underpants just in case you need to undress for a scandalous medical emergency. Your shoes are a marvel of medieval engineering. The toes alone could be registered as minor weapons, curled, stuffed, and supported by little chains that connect to your knee so you don't trip over your own status. Peasants stare in awe, and even your own dog is a little scared of them. You like to think of yourself as a trendsetter, but your steward just calls it a liability. Then there's your codpiece, which has transcended function and entered legend. It is a conversation starter, a weather vane, and possibly a minor navigational hazard. Entire rooms shift to accommodate its presence. There are even stories told among the servants. Beware the west wind, lest you be struck down by the Lord's breeches. You laugh, but you do check the forecast before sitting down at formal dinners. Jewelry? You've stopped wearing it for fashion and started treating it as armor. Rings on every finger, sometimes double-stacked, and a chain so heavy around your neck that you occasionally need assistance just to stand. Your hat pins alone could poke a hole through next year's harvest. And your earrings are so elaborate that they sometimes require their own footman. But it's not all fun and games. The law eventually takes notice. Enter the sumptuary laws, medieval attempts to keep the upper crust from going completely off the rails. The king decrees that no subject may wear silk above the knee, and suddenly your entire wardrobe is a criminal enterprise. You play along for a week or two, parading around in linen and pretending not to mind. But soon enough, you're sneaking in forbidden trims and wearing hidden silk linings. If you can't show your wealth, you'll at least know it's there, brushing your legs with every scandalous step. Sometimes, you receive a gentle warning. A note from the town magistrate suggesting that your cloak's ermine trim is a bit much for a Tuesday. Other times, you're called out publicly, perhaps at church, where the priest delivers a sermon on humility and not dressing like a parade float. You nod politely, donate a new altar cloth, and immediately plan an outfit so ostentatious it'll make the next sermon run long. Of course, you're not just reckless with clothes. Your fortune itself is an endless source of temptation. Why settle for a normal horse when you could import one from the Holy Roman Empire with a mane braided in gold? Why eat from pewter when you could dine from a golden plate, even if it does make your food taste suspiciously metallic? If you want a tapestry, you want it bigger than the last, preferably visible from the next county. Every now and then, excess backfires. You're trapped in a staircase by your own hat. You drop a ruby into the moat. Or your shoes get you stuck in a doorway for a full hour before someone notices. But these are minor setbacks. You laugh, call it avant-garde inconvenience, and remind yourself that fortune favors the bold and the well-accessorized. After all, being too rich for your own good is the real status symbol. And in the end, you wouldn't have it any other way. The best doctors are just as clueless as the worst. But the rich get better leeches, fancier plasters, and herbal concoctions with actual flavor. If you survive a fever, it's probably thanks to sheer financial stubbornness. Let's be honest. Medieval medicine is a high-stakes gamble wrapped in a scented linen bandage. But for the wealthy, every ache and sniffle becomes a full-cast production. When you so much as cough, 3 people rush in, your personal physician, the barber surgeon, and the apothecary, all jostling for position and arguing over whether you need more leeches or just a little less fresh air. Your personal physician is a man of learning, fluent in both Latin and long-winded explanations. He consults a massive book of cures filled with recipes that range from entirely theoretical to definitely tried on a chicken once. His first step is to check your humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too cheerful? Must be too much blood. Achy joints? That's probably an imbalance of yellow bile and last week's bad cheese. The cure is always the same. Open a vein and see what happens. Barber surgeons are a breed apart. Their toolkits look like they belong in a blacksmith's shop. Knives, saws, forceps, and a collection of razors that double as conversation starters. They cut hair, pull teeth, drain boils, and occasionally attempt to reset bones, usually after consulting the barber's guide to winging it. If you're lucky, you'll just leave with a closer shave than intended. If you're unlucky, you might lose a finger or 3. And then there's the apothecary, a cheerful merchant of mysteries, always ready with a jar of suspiciously bright powder or a soothing syrup that smells like it could peel paint off the castle walls. If you're rich, you get the premium blend: crushed pearls, imported cinnamon, and whatever rare root just arrived on the last merchant ship from somewhere vaguely east. The apothecary promises it will cure melancholy, toothache, and disobedient children. You're not sure it does any of that, but it tastes a lot better than the stuff the peasants get, which is mostly mud and optimism. If you're feeling especially poorly, you're subjected to the cure-all of medieval medicine: leeches. The poor might get leeches from the local pond. The wealthy, however, have leeches with pedigrees, bred in clean water and delivered in silk-lined boxes. The best ones, you're told, can detect the difference between a common cold and a crisis of faith. Luxury extends even to bandages. Yours are scented with lavender or rose water and are replaced with impressive frequency, whether you're bleeding or just feeling emotionally wounded. Poultices are made from honey, wine, and rare herbs, each batch mixed by a trembling apprentice who's terrified of getting the dosage wrong. There are even rumors of a doctor in Italy who can stitch wounds closed with golden thread. But you suspect that's just a ploy to raise his consulting fee. But for all this extravagance, actual results are mixed. You might survive a fever, but only after being bled, purged, and forced to drink 3 different remedies, one of which is definitely just fancy vinegar. Some nights, you wake up surrounded by anxious servants, 3 doctors, and a very confused priest, all waiting to see if you'll pull through or need last rites. Recovery, when it happens, is ascribed to your excellent genes, divine intervention, or the power of your bank account. If things go badly, your doctor assures your heirs that the stars were simply unfavorable this week. Either way, you end up paying handsomely, if only to keep the castle rumor mill spinning, and your rivals wondering if you're actually immortal. In the end, luxury healthcare in the Middle Ages is a blend of hope, superstition, and relentless spending. If you're lucky enough to live through it, you get bragging rights and maybe a new leech named in your honor. Because when it comes to surviving medieval medicine, the richest cure is sheer stubbornness and a bit of denial. Dinner is more of a spectacle than a meal. Afterward, you retire to your chamber to gossip, gamble, and drink imported wine while your spouse reminds you how much the minstrels cost. The night ends with a parade of servants tucking you in, just in case you forgot how rich you are. Let's begin with dinner, which isn't so much a meal as it is a theatrical event with a calorie count. The great hall glows by torchlight, tables groaning under the weight of game birds, haunches of venison, sugared fruits, and pies that require their own supporting cast. Toasts are made to health, to fortune, to the family's new swan pond, and to the hope it won't end in another incident. The minstrels pluck and strum, a jester tumbles into the soup, and you nod graciously as the steward attempts to keep the roast from being claimed by the family dog. Guests angle for the choicest morsels and drop pointed hints about the lack of sturgeon caviar, never mind that you're nowhere near the sea. Eventually, plates are cleared, goblets refilled, and the official business of the evening begins. Gentle backbiting and lively gossip. The fire crackles, velvet cushions are plumped, and you settle into the familiar routine of discussing which cousin got caught kissing the baker's daughter and who among your rivals has the worst taste in tunics. Your spouse keeps a running total of the night's expenses, occasionally sliding the tally across the table with a look that says, "Remember this at Christmas." After dessert, usually some alarming attempt at a sugar sculpture, you retire to your private chambers. Here, luxury shifts gears from public performance to private ritual. Your bedroom is vast and drafty, with a bed so high it requires a step stool and so wide you could host an entire tournament on the sheets. Embroidered tapestries block the worst of the night air, while the hearth blazes in a valiant but ultimately futile attempt to keep your toes warm. Now comes the gambling. Dice clatter, cards are dealt, and family fortunes ride on the outcome of a particularly intense round of who can bluff the hardest while drinking the most. The stakes are low, last week's debts are still unpaid, but the thrill is real. Occasionally, a servant stands by with more wine and a discreet suggestion that perhaps it's time to call it a night. You ignore him, confident in your ability to stay upright until at least the second round of cheese. Some nights, a bard or poet is invited for a private performance, filling the chamber with tales of heroic ancestors, tragic love stories, and the occasional thinly veiled dig at the neighboring lord. You clap appreciatively, offer another goblet of wine, and consider commissioning a poem about your new boots just to see if anyone notices. At last, you prepare for bed, a process involving more steps than the average peasant's morning routine. Servants appear from nowhere, smoothing the sheets, fluffing pillows, and warming bricks for your feet. One lights scented candles, another arranges a nightcap, and a third stands by with a silver basin in case you feel like washing your hands just one more time. Your nightshirt is so soft it could double as a diplomatic gift, and the mattress is so stuffed with feathers that you occasionally lose smaller valuables in the folds. The final act, the tucking, in ceremony, 2, sometimes 3. Servants carefully wrap you in layers of blankets, tucking each edge with reverence. The bed is weighed down with so many coverlets and furs that you feel like a well-protected roast. As they quietly depart, you're left with the soft glow of embers, the faint scent of lavender, and the certainty that if you need anything, water, wine, a lullaby, someone will appear within moments. And so the day ends, warm, comfortable, slightly tipsy, and completely swaddled in the undeniable luxury of knowing you're just a whispered bell away from anything you desire. Sleep comes easily, especially when you have half the staff making sure it does. It's dark, drafty, and filled with the muffled sounds of distant snoring. You fall asleep surrounded by 40 pillows, your valuables under guard, and a faint worry that someone will try to poison your midnight snack. But don't worry, your taster is still awake. The castle at night is a world unto itself. Long after the laughter and clinking goblets of the feast fade, the halls take on a new personality, one of flickering torchlight and secrets carried on chilly drafts. The walls, so reassuring by day, now creak and settle with the kind of ancient groans that make you wonder if your ancestors are rearranging the family portraits just to mess with you. Your bed is a fortress inside a fortress. Pillows of every shape and size create a soft barricade between you and the stone walls, which, despite a roaring fire, always manage to radiate the subtle ambience of a meat locker. Under your covers is the only place truly warm, and you nestle in, acutely aware that somewhere at the foot of the bed is a pouch containing a week's worth of emergency jewels, just in case you need to bribe a bandit at short notice. Security, of course, is taken seriously. Your valuables are locked up, keys hidden in places so obscure that you occasionally forget where they are yourself. The night guards patrol the corridors, armor clinking and boots echoing through the empty halls. You fall asleep to the reassuring, or is it ominous, sound of a halberd tapping rhythmically on the flagstones. Somewhere in the dark, your food taster is stationed by the kitchen, watching over your midnight snack with the focus of a man who knows that even a plum tart can be a weapon in the right or wrong hands. If you wake up hungry, a quick ring of the bell brings not only food but a reassuring report. No poisons, my lord. Only a slight hint of too much clove. Of course, castles are not just filled with people. There are the ghosts, real or imagined, who provide a soundtrack of unexplained footsteps, mysterious cold spots, and the occasional spectral groan that is always, somehow, blamed on Uncle Reginald's unfinished business. The servants insist they saw a shadow pass through the gallery. The guards roll their eyes, but keep a lucky charm tucked under their helmets just in case. The worst of it all is that one corridor. You know the one, the impossibly long hallway that seems to creak in every season, whether or not anyone is walking through it. The wind whistles through the arrow slits, creating the world's oldest and least helpful white noise machine. Some nights, you send extra guards down just to check for intruders. Other nights, you simply roll over, pull the furs higher, and hope that if the castle is haunted, the ghosts at least have good taste in bedtime stories. If you can't sleep, there's always the castle library, open all hours to those brave enough to face its cobwebs and the librarian, who may actually be older than most of the books. Sometimes you wander the ramparts, wrapped in a cloak, marveling at the silence of the countryside below and the sense that, at least until dawn, the world outside is someone else's problem. Eventually, sleep settles over the castle. The fire dies down, the guards grow quiet, and even the mice in the walls tuck in for the night. In the soft dark, surrounded by stone, velvet, and the collective snores of an aristocratic household, you drift off, dreaming, perhaps, of a morning where your greatest worry is whether the taster is awake or if the ghosts have borrowed your slippers again. Because in a medieval castle, night is both the end of a day's spectacle and the beginning of 1,000 small mysteries, each one safely on the other side of your blanket fortress, at least until morning. Even the rich aren't immune to disaster. Castles burn down, fortunes vanish, peasants revolt, and sometimes your cousin runs off with the family jewels. But until then, you're living in high style. And as you drift off to sleep, you realize that being medieval rich is mostly about staying one step ahead of everyone who wants your job. Disaster in the Middle Ages, comes in many forms, most of them smelling faintly of smoke or treachery. You could be sleeping soundly one night, dreaming of your next imported tapestry, only to wake up to a castle on fire because someone got a little too enthusiastic with the torch at last night's feast. Medieval buildings, after all, are basically kindling with windows, and your fine tapestries and feather beds just add fuel to the flames. The staff springs into action. Buckets are formed into a chain. Valuable furniture is heaved out the window, and someone always tries to save the wine cellar first. Priorities. Sometimes, the disaster isn't fiery but financial. A single bad harvest, a failed investment in exotic leech futures, or one too many extravagant tournaments, and suddenly your gold chest is looking a little light. Rumors swirl. Has the Baron gone broke? Are the silver spoons made of tin? The steward starts looking worried. The chef gets creative with turnip recipes, and you begin to eye the family jewels as potential escape funds. There's a reason so many noble houses have a rainy day tiara tucked away in a secret chest behind the third tapestry on the left. And then there's the threat from within. The classic cousin heist. Medieval families are big, interconnected, and just a little bit chaotic. You trust your relatives, at least as far as you can throw them, and you haven't done much upper body training since the last joust. But every once in a while, a clever cousin or ambitious sibling decides that their destiny lies elsewhere, preferably with half your plate collection and the deed to your southern pasture. They vanish in the night, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a trail of cheese crumbs leading to the nearest port. Of course, the peasants have a role to play in your daily risk assessment. For years you've taxed them, managed them, and thrown the occasional feast. But peasant patience has its limits. One too many taxes, a drought, or a particularly bad stew, and the village might decide it's time for a little local government restructuring, complete with pitchforks and flaming torches. You stand atop your battlements, wondering whether it's too late to invent democracy, or at least offer everyone a slice of pie and a new hat. Robbery is another occupational hazard. Highwaymen lurk on the roads, waiting for your gold-laden messengers or, worse, your delivery of French cheese. Sometimes, entire bands of thieves get ambitious, plotting raids that leave you counting your silverware and double-checking the locks on the moat gates. There are legends of famous robbers, part folk hero, part annoyance, whose exploits become dinner table stories, provided you weren't the one robbed. Still, medieval karma has a way of catching up with everyone. That neighbor you outmaneuvered at last year's land auction? Suddenly he's the one with the royal favor. The jester you fired for juggling one too many candlesticks, now performing for your rival's wedding? Twice as funny and twice as well paid. Yet, despite it all, you endure. You tighten your purse strings, charm your creditors, and maybe, just maybe, start being a little nicer to your staff, if only because you need someone to carry your emergency bag when things go south. And as you tuck yourself into bed, listening to the wind howl and the distant sound of a cousin sneaking out the back door, you remember being filthy rich in medieval times isn't just about wealth. It's about dodging disaster, laughing at your losses, and waking up every morning to try again, preferably in a castle that's still standing. Because in the grand tapestry of medieval fortune, even the richest threads can unravel. But the truly wealthy know how to stitch things back together, one absurd story at a time. Travel isn't as simple as calling a medieval Uber. When you leave your castle, it's a logistical nightmare. You pack up half your house, 20 trunks, a traveling altar, and enough retainers to fill a soccer team. Your carriage is less luxury sedan and more rickety wooden tank with gold-plated wheels. You spend most of the journey judging peasants from behind velvet curtains, while secretly praying the next bridge doesn't collapse under the weight of your ego. Let's start at the beginning. You never travel light. The idea of leaving home with just the essentials is for monks and merchants. You are nobility, which means essentials include your best tapestries, at least 2 musical instruments, you never know when you'll need a dramatic entrance, and the kitchen's third best cauldron, just in case the local inn can't make soup up to your standards. You instruct your steward to pack light, and then stand back in awe as he interprets this to mean only 5 feather beds and a modest selection of family silver. The departure itself is a spectacle. Your retinue assembles in the courtyard. Bodyguards in matching tunics, footmen, torchbearers, a personal scribe, the falconer, and a monk whose job is to remind everyone to pray for good weather and better roads. There's always one servant who insists on bringing the family dog, and another who's already regretting the decision. Bystanders gawk as you climb into your carriage, an unwieldy wooden marvel with gold leaf, creaky wheels, and suspension best described as aspirational. The journey is a trial by endurance. Medieval roads are less highway and more goat path with ambitions. Every rut and stone is faithfully transmitted to your tailbone, while your carriage lurches from pothole to pothole. Progress is slow, and at every tiny village, you are greeted by crowds of curious locals, half hoping for a handout, half hoping you don't ask to use the communal well. You wave regally, hiding your mounting suspicion that you left something important behind. Your favorite pillow? The spare falcon? A child? Of course, you never travel alone. The retinue must be fed, watered, and occasionally reminded not to wander off and join a troupe of traveling actors. You stop at every second inn, only to discover the beds are filled with straw, the mead is suspiciously cloudy, and the local delicacy is something that stares back at you from the plate. You send a servant ahead to demand better accommodations, only to find there is no better, just more hay. There's always a roadside incident. A wheel falls off, the axle cracks, or someone's prized hunting hound escapes and has to be retrieved from a duck pond. If you're especially unlucky, the bridge ahead has collapsed, again, and the only solution is to bribe a dozen villagers into building a temporary crossing, which somehow always involves your best linen napkins and a lot of anxious prayer. Meanwhile, your traveling altar is set up for impromptu services, and the family relic is displayed with reverence, mostly to remind the servants not to swear every time a wheel hits a stone. The scenery changes, but your standards do not. You look out through velvet curtains at fields and forests, judging the quality of the local sheep, wondering why every other castle looks suspiciously like yours, and mentally composing complaints about road maintenance for your return. Meals are taken al fresco, meaning on a wobbly table next to a ditch, with your own chef doing their best to create magic from root vegetables, and whatever dried sausage can be salvaged from the bottom of a trunk. Finally, after days or weeks of bumping along the king's highways, you arrive at your destination, rumpled but triumphant. Your servants spill out, trunks are unloaded, and you make your grand entrance, perfectly timed to impress your host and intimidate your rivals. Behind you, the carriage collapses in relief, and you vow never to travel again, at least until the next family wedding. Because for the medieval rich, the journey is less about the destination and more about the spectacle, the entourage, and the secret hope that next time, someone will finally invent smooth roads. You know you're truly wealthy when you never have to feel alone, because there are always at least 6 heavily armed men standing between you and any potential inconvenience. Need to fetch your slippers? That's a job for the squire. Suspect a cousin of plotting against you? Time to double the guards and invent a new password for the wine cellar. Paranoia isn't a symptom, it's a privilege. Let's be honest. The richer you are, the more you're convinced someone, somewhere, wants your stuff. Maybe it's an envious neighbor. Maybe it's a distant relative with a suspicious mustache. Maybe it's the local juggler with that I know where the gold is look. Whatever the threat, you're prepared. Forget home security systems, your answer to everything is put more men on it. The front gate, the rear courtyard, the room where you keep your extra hats, each guarded by a professional whose job description boils down to stand there, look menacing, and never, ever let anyone borrow the good silver. Your private army is a status symbol in itself. They're uniformed in your house colors, which, if you're fashionable, change every season just to keep your rivals guessing. Some wield swords so shiny they could signal passing ships. Others prefer axes, bows, or the ever-fashionable pointed stick. Each man-at-arms has taken an oath to defend your honor, or, failing that, your cheese seller. Of course, you also have the specialist guards. The cupbearer, who tastes every drink in case your jealous cousin tries to spice up the evening with a little poison. The food taster, who's developed an iron stomach and a keen sense of self-preservation. The night watchman, who's really just there to make sure no one sneaks out with your best candlesticks after midnight. For extra peace of mind, you occasionally hire a mercenary or two, mysterious men with accents no one can place, who stand silently at feasts, terrifying both the guests and the furniture. Security isn't just about muscle, it's about systems. You invent passwords for the wine cellar, words so complex, even you sometimes forget them, and have to bribe the steward for access. You create decoy chests for your gold, filled with rocks and old IOUs. You commission elaborate locks and keys, the kind that require a minor miracle and 2 engineers to open. You even install a bell system, so the moment a door is breached, half the castle starts ringing like an over-caffeinated church choir. Daily life is one long security drill. Want to walk from the solar to the garden? Better bring 2 bodyguards, 3 pages, and a dog trained to sniff out trouble and sausages. Attending a banquet? Arrive with an entourage so large, it has to be introduced in shifts. Even your bath isn't safe. Someone stands guard outside the door, just in case the soap is tampered with, or an enemy attempts a sneak attack with lavender water. Paranoia, for the wealthy, is simply good manners. You sleep with a dagger under your pillow, a guard at your door, and the faint suspicion that your pet monkey has been taking bribes from the chamberlain. Your trusted retainers all have backup retainers, and every meeting ends with a discreet pat-down for concealed cheese wheels. But deep down, you know it's all part of the game. For every real threat, bandits, scheming relatives, that one unstable juggler, there are 100 imagined ones. And you wouldn't have it any other way. Security means power. Paranoia means you're important enough to need it. And nothing says I've made it like a private army to fetch your slippers and a squire to guard your wine. In the medieval upper crust, being alone is a failure of imagination. You surround yourself with armed loyalty, not because you must, but because you can. After all, in a world where trust is rare and fortunes are made and lost at sword point, a little healthy paranoia isn't just sensible, it's practically a luxury accessory. When you have more money than sense, you'll eventually end up in court, medieval style. Maybe your neighbor accused you of stealing their prized pig, or the king wants to borrow your fortune for his next crusade. Luckily, you can afford lawyers, bribes, and enough paperwork to wallpaper 3 banquet halls. Justice isn't blind, but it does squint at your bank balance. Let's be clear, medieval law is less about right and wrong, and more about who can show up with the most scrolls and the fanciest hat. Court is a spectator sport, held in chilly halls with echoing stone walls, where everyone wears too much fur and pretends to understand Latin. Your case might be heard by a lord, a bishop, or, if you're especially unlucky, a royal cousin who still remembers the incident with the borrowed chess set. The process starts with the paperwork: petitions, affidavits, seals, and signatures, most of which are handled by your personal scribe, who is paid mostly in pastries and the promise of a new quill every Easter. Your steward gathers evidence, witness statements, receipts, and the occasional chicken feather for illustrative purposes. You arrive at court draped in your most intimidating cloak, trailing a small army of legal advisors who have memorized every loophole in the law, plus a few they invented themselves. The allegations are always dramatic. Perhaps a rival accuses you of improper fencing, not the sport, but the actual, literal fence dividing your estates. Maybe the baker claims your hounds trampled his wheat fields, or the king, running short on cash, suggests a voluntary contribution to his latest military adventure. If things get really spicy, there's talk of witchcraft, usually because your gardener's turnips grew in the shape of the royal crest. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is tense, but theatrical. The judge, or whoever's holding the biggest wig, calls for order. Your lawyer rises, launches into a speech about the sanctity of property, tradition, and how your family has always been fiercely law-abiding. The opposition counters with tales of missing sheep, stolen water rights, and the time you accidentally hosted a feast on land that may or may not have belonged to the abbey. You listen politely, occasionally feigning shock or outrage for dramatic effect. At key moments, you nod to your lawyer, who hands over the special envelope, a gentle reminder to the judge that, in medieval justice, the right coin in the right hand can speed up any verdict. Everyone pretends not to notice, and the wheels of justice creak forward. If things get dicey, you deploy the next weapon in your legal arsenal, character witnesses. These are friends, relatives, and tenants who are very grateful for last year's generous gift of firewood and happy to swear on anything that you are the very soul of honesty. On a really good day, your bard will compose a song about your innocence, performed in court, preferably with a backing lute for extra pathos. Sometimes, justice works in your favor. The judge rules that, yes, you may keep the pig, the fence, and the half-acre of disputed turnip land. Other times, the king decides your loan to the crown will be repaid eventually, which you know means never. Once in a blue moon, you lose, usually because your opponent is even richer, or the bishop found out about that unfortunate jest at last year's Christmas feast. In the end, it's all just another performance. You leave court, victorious or otherwise, still surrounded by your legal team who are already planning the next suit or counterclaim. The peasants gossip about your triumph, the neighbors grumble, and the king quietly checks your name off his list of potential donors. Because in the medieval world, legal trouble isn't a sign you've done something wrong, it's a sign you've made it. And when justice squints, it's just checking how much you're worth. And so, as the candles gutter low and your mind drifts into that plush, indoor plumbing kind of sleep, let's take a moment to honor the wild ride you've just survived, a day in the life of the medieval filthy rich. Because for all their golden goblets, goose feather mattresses, and armies of people paid to hold their hats, life at the top was never simple, safe, or even especially comfortable. Underneath all that velvet, everyone's feet were still cold, the castle draft still found its way in, and you could still lose it all because of a cousin with sharp elbows and looser morals. Tonight, maybe smile at the idea that somewhere, long ago, a medieval lord was lying awake, paranoid about being poisoned, arguing with their spouse over dowry negotiations, and realizing that not even mountains of gold could stop the occasional mouse from running across their breakfast. Remember, being rich back then wasn't so much about security or luxury. It was more like a high-stakes improv routine, performed in front of an audience of hungry relatives, suspicious servants, and the ever-judgmental village priest. Yet, despite the disasters, fires, feasts gone wrong, lost fortunes, and the existential dread of inventing sumptuary laws, these people kept building, scheming, and clinging to their silk-lined dreams. They survived on wits, luck, and an endless supply of plausible deniability. And somehow, their stubborn hope and creative accounting helped inch the world toward the creature comforts we have now. So tonight, as you tuck yourself under your machine-washable sheets, set your thermostat to not dying, and maybe raid the fridge without hiring a servant, whisper a small thanks to the generations who endured freezing drafts, fashion disasters, and the unfiltered horror of medieval cheese. The next time your Wi-Fi cuts out, or your latte isn't quite right, just remember you're living in the era they dreamed of. History proves that people, rich or poor, are hopeful, ridiculous, and very, very hard to keep down. Here's to all the filthy rich of yesterday, who struggled so you can now sleep in peace, safe, warm, and, if you're lucky, occasionally dreaming of moats. Good night, and may your sleep be as deep as a castle vault and twice as well guarded.